Whereabouts?
And then once the application is set,
My name is Amnon Kruvi, and if you've never seen me here on stage before, it's probably because I've never done anything like this before. I know every month they beg for speakers, so I've decided, hey, let's give it a shot. So I'll do a brief introduction about myself, and hopefully that'll give a bit of background on what I'm about to talk about tonight. So I am a consultant, solution architect at a consultancy called 1218 Global. I previously co-founded a Salesforce ISV. I've got 5 years in Salesforce, but about 15 years in CRM in general. 12 times certified, and apologies in advance, I'm terrible with PowerPoint and Paint, so if you look at this horrible color scheme that I've chosen over there, you can berate me about it later. So it is in this time period where I've worked as both a consultant and an ISV, where honestly guys, I've noticed a barrier, a rift between the ISV world and the consulting world. So I'm gonna tell you guys a story, and I hope that a lot of people here who work as consultants and ISVs can relate to it, and then I'm gonna offer a solution to those problems that I've been trying out myself, and hopefully can kick out a whole new era of cooperation. So meet our hypothetical client. It's called Square Bricks, and they produce bricks that are square as opposed to their competitor who makes round bricks. And this guy right here, he's called Homer Stonemason. Oh no, it's a Simpsons reference, I get it. Okay, thank you. And he's their system admin. And what they do on Salesforce is they manage their sales database. I know, very original. Now, Homer was tasked with finding solutions to increase efficiency. So what does every admin do when they need to find solutions to increase efficiency in their database? They go on the App Exchange. Homer went on the App Exchange and he found this super extreme sales schedule application. And he tried it out. He installs it on the org. Now, when you install an application from the App Exchange on your org, I don't need to explain this to you guys, you probably already know this, it comes in the form of a managed package. And I know we just talked about packaging 2.0, but for the time being, we're still talking about managed packages. And what that means is that you get a bunch of components, and although you can add to them, if you have a custom object, you can add new fields. You can add a trigger, you can add a new page. You can never change any of the components that come in that managed package. And what that means is when Homer has some ideas to increase user adoption, it can be simple things like a color scheme. He wants to incorporate the corporate color scheme into an application. Can he call his consultants? Can he call the ISV's partner, implementation partner, to make that change? No. He has to go to the ISV directly. So here we have Lynn, and Lynn is the head of development for the ISV. And Homer has to pick up the phone and talk to her because she's literally the only person who can do anything about what he needs. So they have a few chats and they come to a realization that the best solution for Homer's problem regarding the color scheme is to implement some new custom settings. And you know, it's a great idea. We'll make some new custom settings for color codes. Sounds good, right? I can see no way this could ever backfire. Until the backfire. Now, I'm not here to slate custom settings. Custom settings are great when you want to control the flow of your application, and in particular when you want to create some less than visible settings on the app, like passwords, API keys, things that even the admin can't see, and protected custom settings are excellent for that. But they have one major limitation, because they can only ever do what they've been designed to do in advance. So when you have that client who suddenly remembers, oh wait, I know I asked for colors, but how do I put my company logo in the app? How do I change this picture? Suddenly, you have to go through yet another release cycle and wait weeks for another version that supports it. Now, in my time as an ISV, I've learned one thing that's very important. No two customers are really alike. Every business that I spoke to ever truly and honestly believes that they do business in a unique, completely their own way. And to some extent, that's true. A lot of businesses do work in their own unique way. And sometimes it can be something as simple as changing labels, changing the name of processes, but sometimes it can be something a lot more profound, and they need completely separate processes. And today, all we can do as ISVs is create more settings, new pages, and add all these branching ifs to handle all these different use cases and all these different scenarios. So I'm here to present, hopefully, a rather good solution. And it's to do with exposing our application for modification by consulting partners. And those can be either the client's consultants or in-house development team, and you know they exist. You know a lot of clients have devs. Or they can be your own ISV partners. As an ISV, you can have your own consulting partners who can make modifications to your application without you having to spend all those resources on handling every single client you have and their requests. Now, the first part of this solution is allowing external style sheets. Now, I'm not just saying stick in a URL and load that style sheet. That's not going to work. But I am saying if you allow an administrator to upload a static resource that contains a style sheet, and that style sheet can be created by a consulting partner, by an in-house development team, suddenly you have the power to change color scheme. You have the power to add images, you have the power to move things, and you have the power to allow your customer to unify their look and feel across their entire org. Not just regular Salesforce themes, but also a theme for your app. And you might think this is difficult to do. It's going to take a lot of work, but I just put together some examples here, and when you can download the slide decks later, take a look at those. In Visualforce, it's obviously trivial to do. All you need is a custom setting with the name of a static resource. You add a link tag with a URL for using that custom setting. In Lightning Components, it's a bit more complicated. And why? Because of Lightning Locker service. And you guys know that you can't just go and add a script tag, and you can't just go and add a style tag and expect to just load whatever file you put in there. What we can do with Lightning Components, though, is instantiate child components dynamically at runtime. And we can instantiate an LTNG require component at runtime. And we can give that component a list of style sheets, one or more, coming from a static resource that we want to load. Again, in runtime. That means, as far as your package is concerned, you don't need that file to exist when you release the package. You just need a string containing the path to that package. You can even have a callback function, so when that style sheet finished loading, you call another JavaScript method in the controller. So the application doesn't even have to be asynchronous. You can make it a synchronous part of your application. So in our example for Square Bricks, if we look here on the left, we have the default style of the app that they installed. You see the black header, the narrow columns, and on the right, if you can see, I know it's a bit of a mess there, but you notice that the header became blue, the boxes representing sales tasks became black, and they added column highlighting. They even rounded the corners on the photos next to every user, because that's the thing that you can do when you just have a little access to change the CSS. The second part of the solution is doing the exact same thing with JavaScript. Now, the exact same concept works for both Lightning Components and Visualforce. In Visualforce, you add a script tag, that's okay. But we know that in Lightning Components, you can no longer add script tags. But the LTNG require component does have a script attribute. You create some settings to allow the admin to enter the name of a static resource with a script, and you can load that again in runtime and use the callback method to continue the regular loading of your application. What can you do once you get a script loaded into your component? So Square Bricks decided to just make a tutorial. It's your first time using this app. Here's how to use it. Heaven knows, when I was an ISV and I was tasked with building a tutorial, there's so many use cases. How am I going to build a tutorial that fits every client? I couldn't. I gave up. I couldn't do it. But if you have a consulting partner, if you have an in-house dev team, and you have a specific way of using that application, suddenly those options unlock for you. You can add all this user interactivity that the ISV never could even dream of doing, because they have to handle not just you, but literally every person in this room who has different requirements. Other things you can do with scripts is create your own form validation. So maybe in your company this field is required, and maybe you need to add a completely new field or remove a field. You can do that. Maybe you want to add an on-hover text when you hover over a field to get additional help. You can do that. You can, anything that you can think of in terms of interactivity, let your clients do it with their own partners or yours. Just increase the cooperation. Don't take everything on yourself. Of course, when we talk about injecting an external file, even if it was built by a professional, we still have risks. We have to worry about the integrity of our core application. We need to worry about something that they write not breaking what we wrote. And we need to worry about what happens when we release a new version of our application. Because eventually we will. But those issues can be mitigated with just a very few ground rules. For example, when you do write a JavaScript function, use your own namespace. Hook your logic into an existing function rather than replace it. So in JavaScript, you can take a function, rename it, then override that function with your own, but still call the original one, the original renamed one. If you do that, when I release a new version and that original function changes, you still get my changes. You don't have to copy and paste it all over again. Now, I've been talking about client side, and that's all well and good, but we all know that if you can't do new things on the server, then really what's it all worth? Because the server is where everything really happens. That's where things are saved. So when Homer decided that he wants to load some new fields from the database, those things happen on the controller level, not on JavaScript, not on CSS. Can we do anything to help consulting partners make modifications to Apex code? They can't even see the code in a managed package. How can they possibly make modifications to it? They can't. Bye-bye. No. I am joking. I am joking, otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? We're going to use Apex Reflection to allow consulting partners, people from outside our ISV, to make changes to our code without having to see it, without exposing intellectual property. I know it sounds insane, but it's completely doable. The first component we're going to use is called an interface. Now, you guys are all hardened developers. You probably know what an interface is, but for those who don't, an interface is essentially a template of a class, an empty shell. You define what would go in the class, but you don't actually add any of the logic. You have function signatures, you don't have the functions themselves. Here's an example of an interface. It's called task helper. And this interface has two methods in it, one to delete a task, one to create a task. And the class underneath it implements task helper. It has the exact same function signatures, but it actually has the contents for those functions. And this task helper implementation, that can be the class that I put in my package. That can be the default class that I would use in my package, but I would simply refer to it as a task helper type instead of task helper implementation. Whenever I use any sort of pointer to my class, I can still use task helper and have access to all the functions that are in that interface. What it also means is that a consultant can go and write another class, their own class, that implements this same interface and has the same function signatures. And then my packaged code can still call those same methods on that external class. Next component is custom metadata types. Now, a lot of us don't use them still because they've only been around for a couple of years on Salesforce. What is it, 3 years that they've been around? And they're actually a very useful tool, especially when it comes to creating configuration They work exactly like S-objects with one major difference. You can include them in a package and you can include them in a change set. This makes them configuration metadata that you can work on using development tools. And because they're configuration metadata that can be part of a package, you can default class mappings that are part of your package. So in the case of our example here, our original mapping might say that my controller, task controller, uses task helper implementation by default as part of the package. But then an admin or consultant can go and change that to a completely different class name. Now I know what you're thinking. These are just strings. What can I do with the name of a class? I can't really do anything with the name of a class, right? This is where type comes in. And type lets you instantiate a class using nothing but its name. Now that we have a mapping and we know what the name of the class is that we want to use, now we can actually instantiate it, even if it didn't exist in the package. It's a custom class on the org. It exists, someone else built it. I never saw it, but I can still use it because someone gave me its name and it implements the same interface that I expect with the functions that I expect to find there. Here's a sample of how to use type. It might be a bit small to read from here, but essentially you query the name of the class you want to instantiate. You add it to, you send it over to type.forName, and you get a type pointer back, and then you call that pointer's new instance function, and that just generates the class for you using the name. It even supports namespaces. It actually accepts two parameters, one for namespace and one for the class name. All of that is completely doable. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. If I have a class in my managed package, it might have 1,000 lines of code. I know it's not ideal, but sometimes we have them, really large classes with a lot of logic, and we can't expect every client and every consultant to be able to reproduce all of the logic that we put in there. I agree. And this is why I want to talk about class virtualization next. And class virtualization is the most simple thing you can do. All you have to do is add virtual before the name of your class and before the name of your methods. You add that keyword, and now a consultant can take your class and extend it. And what do I mean by extending? You take one function from the class, override it. Just the one, not everything, just the one single function, and you override that. You add your logic, and then you call the original implementation of that same function by using the keyword super. Super meaning the class I extended from. In this case, and another sample here that you can't read, I'm sorry, we have an original class, task helper implementation, that has some logic in it, and then an overriding class that overrides just the one method, delete task. And all it does, it adds a null check for the parameter, and then calls the original implementation of that function. It doesn't need to know what it is, so the consultant doesn't need to know how your product works. They can still call your code, and they can still add their own logic before or after your own code. You've not exposed anything but function signatures. And the consultant, meanwhile, they can add any logic that they need to. You don't need to be involved as ISVs. You didn't spend a single hour of manpower changing and creating this new custom task helper. Now, Anoop is not here today, right? I didn't see him today. But the other day, he retweeted something that I think is relevant. So much complexity in software comes from trying to make one thing do two things. Now, let's be honest here. How many of us have written classes with a branching if tree handling all sorts of different scenarios, one per client, because this client asked for this and that client asked for that, over the course of years? You end up with a giant branching if that handles a million different things. Come on, be honest, I don't see enough people nodding. We've all done it. Using reflection, if you can make one class handle one scenario, and instead of having this giant branching if, just tell it, I want to use this handler, I want to use that handler. Use the handler for this client, use the handler for that client. Suddenly your class focuses on doing one thing and not 100. You've saved yourself that much of a headache maintaining that code, developing that code, not to mention all the bugs that can happen when a client accidentally configures their product the way another client likes to. So I'm just going to do a quick recap on the advantages and disadvantages of this approach. Obviously, it's all about the customer. The customer wins here, and the implementation partners win here. Why? Because the customer can finally get the look and feel that they want without having to wait for months and months on release cycles and trying to get to someone who can make the changes that they need. And not all of us have the power to go and talk to the head of development of an app that we use. It means our consulting partners, whether you're a client or an ISV, it means they can go and make the modifications without having to go to you all the time and ask for new configuration for this and that. These are things that I used to do all the time. And of course, it allows the customers to really make one look and feel across their entire Salesforce org. Because you know Salesforce are going in the direction of allowing customers to modify the look and feel. They've just added themes in this release. Why can the core product have it and now my app that I built doesn't look anything like the theme that the client chose? But it does come at a cost of slightly extra development. It comes at a cost of support, because now you're going to have to worry about when a client comes to you for assistance, what sort of customizations they have. But most importantly, you need to worry about education. Because building a partnership and building good customer relations means that you offer all this help and advice and guidance and documentation about the best practices to modify your application. And if you can invest a little bit in that, you're going to save so many resources internally in your own company, and you can actually focus on your product. Now, before I finish, I know there's a bunch of people here who might be thinking, A, there's no way all of this works. Sounds too good to be true. And B, how can this possibly pass a security review? Now, I have an application that passed a security review. Maybe not to an extreme extent, but to some extent with instantiating classes, with loading external JavaScript, and with loading external CSS from static resources. And again, it's all about the client. If enough of us want it and we really build best practices for it, we'll make it work. Now, I've also actually built that scheduler. So that scheduler it's real, it works. You can customize it to your heart's content. And honestly, I've got nothing to do with it. So if you guys want to do something with it, build a product on a schedule, or if you have any questions about reflection, how to make these things work, how to make it happen, here's my email address. Drop me a line. So if anyone has any questions, now's the time.
So we've spoken earlier.
Yeah.
So I think reflection is fantastic. I've seen other apps on the marketplace that use it. A product that I've worked on failed security because we had reflection.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means. I don't know if we just had a grouchy QA look at our work and run us through, or whether that is something to consider. It would be good to speak to Salesforce and get a definite answer on what that is.
You're absolutely right. It would be great to speak to them and get an official stance. Now, what it means if you do want to try and implement it is that talk to your account exec, explain the need for it. Explain, look, I've only got 5, 6, 10 developers. I have 1,000 clients. I want to provide the best service for my client. And I want to provide the best environment for my implementation partners. And your partners, they're your partners as well. If we make that need known, it will be okay. Like I said, I have passed these things before because there was a need.
Yeah, so I mean, if we can pass it, that is fantastic. The product I worked on was a code development with Salesforce.
Okay.
There was a Salesforce architect that stopped us. Now, again, I don't know what that means because it is a fantastic tool. And if we can use it, it's great, but I think it would be good as a community if we could just get validated by Salesforce.
I completely agree with you. I wonder if we have anyone here who's got connections, yeah, you know, with someone who might be able to get us an official stance, maybe even a dialogue opportunity to talk about it.
I'm not allowed to speak, so I don't have any contacts on security. One life component gone to that came about 3 years ago, and I had a similar nightmare of it being constantly rejected. Eventually got it through, but yeah, sadly I don't have any contacts on this.
So what happens when we've got new release out, we have new functionality, we don't add it into the core classes because existing customers will get effectively create a new class. So existing customers are still running the old code when they upgrade.
Exactly.
And only when we want them to upgrade, do they? And that went straight to us until we do no problem.
So were your new classes within the package?
Yeah, we've got them in the package, but we've also got the ability for customers to add their own externals and put a field in the data and that's all.
So at the end of the day, it's really a question of, I guess, grouchy QAs, maybe, but I think more than anything, if you make your case that you need it, that it helps you as a business provide a better service, then you can get it through. Any other questions? Well, just like with anything else, you create a unit test with your test mappings, and you make sure that the right class runs. At the end of the day, the classes that you put in your package still need their own unit tests. You still need your test coverage, and you have to test them. If you're talking about how to test client and consultant customizations, obviously you can't do that in your package, but you can help by building test classes that might be a bit more generic, that don't check for literally everything, but only for a few specific things that even customized code would most likely need to achieve. Exception handling works with reflection just as it does anywhere else. Try and catch, even if it's if you're using an interface and calling a method from an interface pointer, you can still use try and catch. Anyone else?
Just on the security.
Yeah.
In terms of implementing those
Louder.
Sorry. Yes, in terms of implementing those interfaces, how do you mitigate against the risk of those code injections and security, where a client or a consultant can make those changes that would fail your integration test, but two, also expose you to that data that's stored in the database and make them illegal or whatever they want to do.
I have a question for you then, another question. How do you stop a consultant from writing a trigger on your object that deletes all contacts? They can do it anyway. If they really want to, they can do it. The question is, who has access to upload this code? Who has access to create an outbound change set or to upload a static resource? An admin, and people delegated by that admin, because there is some measure of trust. If you want to talk about mitigation, well, I've spoken about mitigating JavaScript risks, but if you really have someone who's trying to achieve something bad, I guess there's nothing you can do. A virus is just a regular program that does something bad, and we still haven't dealt with those.